Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Job Chicks podcast. We're your hosts, Melissa and Brittany.
This is a podcast meant to bring you special insight into executive career search, networking, long-term career management, spirituality, and much more.
Brittany and I are full-time executive career coaches helping dozens of executives manage their brand and their career goals.
We work with individuals spanning almost every industry with a variety of high-level titles, including C-suite.
This podcast will give you a deeper understanding of how we coach and assist executives just like you every single day.
We are so happy that you're here, and we hope you enjoy the show.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this edition to the Job Chicks. You're here with Melissa and Brittany today, and we have a very special guest. We're excited to welcome Isaac Ferland. He is a Marine Corps veteran and a visionary behind the EP Source, a leading platform offering insights into the executive protection industry. Isaac's mission is to empower principals to choose the right protection teams and equip practitioners with the tools to excel. And we're excited to have you here today. And I am excited to ask you so many questions. I know Brittany is too, but I want to start off by having you tell us a little bit more about yourself. I know you've got a lot going on and we'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for having me. Really excited to be here and share some insights with your audience. Yeah, so a little bit about me. My name's Isaac Ferland. As you mentioned, came from a Marine Corps background, and as I transitioned into the civilian world, I as many veterans do, was looking for what really resonated with me. And the protection background was something that kind of fit very well from experience and was a good baseline to jump into. And so after I got out of the military, I started getting into the protection world. I've worked all types of protection, from regular security, critical infrastructure, corporate security, and then found my way into the executive protection space through some connections, and then just really built a business around facilitating better protection for these clients, and identified some areas where we could help everybody in the market, and those who can't necessarily afford executive protection, through information and sharing best practices. And so that's why I started the EP Source. I run a company out of Denver called Four Rings, where we do training, teaching, consulting, and have clients all over the US. So that's where I'm at currently. But yeah, no, excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you, and we have lots of questions because I never realized how important it was to have executive protection, of course, until the most recent incident. And, I've watched TV shows, I watched Succession, and I never realized that this was an actual thing that needed to happen. So tell us why this is such a threat to someone who is a really important CEO to a super large company. And when did you realize that this was something that was important for you to actually create a business?
Yeah, so that's a great question. A quick analogy that really helps kind of paint the picture is, if you were worried about the condition of your heart, you'd probably go see a cardiologist, right? And then they'd walk through symptoms and tell you what was wrong. If you started hearing strange noises in your car, maybe the brakes weren't working correctly, you'd probably want to go see a mechanic. Now, I wouldn't expect you to know everything about how a car was engineered or what the inner workings of a heart look like to know that you had to go see a specialist for that. And so that's essentially what executive protection, or what these CEOs should think about and consider, is, what does my threat profile look like? Should safety be a concern of mine? And just getting a professional opinion first and foremost, and knowing where to look, I think, is super important. But everybody has a unique threat profile. Just like you have a thumbprint that is unique to you, your threat profile is unique to you. For example, just the two of you even having a podcast, the visibility and the public image that this brings probably has come across your mind in terms of the visibility that you're getting and how that may change your risk profile. So for a lot of CEOs in these positions, public figures, celebrities, influencers, there's a lot of considerations that go into it, but there's definitely it's good to investigate, right? Especially with the weight of it being your life at risk, your family's life, your public image, especially if that's tied to your brand, such as this podcast. So it is definitely something that a lot of CEOs are becoming more and more privy to. But for me, I wasn't really aware of this world either until I got out of the military and started getting further and further into the protection space and looking at the full scope and realizing that this is a large industry. There's a lot of things that can be done in this industry to not only improve it, but make sure that CEOs can focus on what they're really good at. The same way a CEO is going to go hire an executive assistant to help manage their administrative tasks that are going to have a driver to take them from A to B. It's really so they can get back to what they do best and take away some of the tasks so they don't have to be worried, such as the recent events that took place with that CEO. I'm sure after the fact, he would have liked to have had executive protection involved in that situation.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah. Well, the first thing I think on everyone's mind, especially with the time frame of having you on our podcast, is the assassination that we all witnessed. When you first heard about that news, run us through what went through your mind when you were like getting this news and everything was unfolding.
So when I first heard about it, I obviously wanted to take a step back and wait for more data to arise. I didn't know if there was some type of technical element or virtual protection. Maybe he had information or details. Was there previous threats that had been made towards this individual? What was the inner workings of the companies? What had they done previously that might have sparked any unrest amongst any of their population? So first and foremost, kind of take a step back and just collected data. We don't want to jump to any conclusions. Now, with that being said, there's a few statistics that really helped when I did start to finally look at it. There started to come out with some video footage that I was reviewing. And specifically here in the US, historically, when assassination attempts have failed, 57% of the time, it was because of team intervention. So protective team intervention.
Wow.
So right off the bat, I assumed that he didn't have a team based off of that statistic. But then upon further evaluation, looking at the few videos that came out of the street view, we also saw that he acted alone, which is about 80% of US-based attacks. And then on top of that, the majority of US-based attacks happen within 25 feet or less. And this met all of the benchmarks of an assassination attempt that would take place here in the US. So it took a couple days, but I actually did do a full protection review. It's available on the EP source on YouTube of that specific event. I found the video camera footage and walked through some of those things that I did think about. Definitely seemed to be a crime of passion. And regardless of the political affiliation of what the company did and justice and whatnot, it's sad to see somebody get assassinated. And it is very concerning if you're a CEO in charge of a company.
Absolutely. I was really surprised that, were there threats made ahead of time? Like you don't hear any of that. There wasn't a whole lot of information about it. And I was just really stunned that, it was so early in the morning and he was going to a meeting. How did he know that there was a meeting that morning? How did he know what time he was going to go to that meeting? So what information do you normally give somebody who's maybe a CEO or looking for protection? Is that part of the protocol that they're presenting you with the schedule or keeping the schedule quiet?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up. So aside from that first step of reaching out to a professional to look at your overall risk profile and see where could mitigation steps be made, a few simple tips, and this is for anybody, not just the CEO, but think about your daily life and where you go. Do you stop for coffee at the same place every morning? Do you take the same routes to and from work? Maybe every time the CEO visited New York, does he stay at the same hotel? Does he take the same routes? These are all data points. And in today's world, which is very virtual, these data points are easier to collect from somebody who wants to do harm sitting from the comfort of their home. They can track these data points from social media. They can track these data points from the environment. There's a lot of ways they can take these data points and use them for malicious intent. So as a protective team, there is a lot that we do before we even step on the ground with a client. So it's not just reactive. We like to be as proactive as possible. I like to sit down with clients and say everything that we're looking to do is 99% proactive, so we don't have to do the 1% reactive part. And we train heavily for that because that's the most deadly. However, when we look to step into a situation like this, we'll have known the routes of where the CEO is going to and from. We are going to look at the medical the hospitals nearby. What is the trauma center, the level of the trauma center that is nearby in terms of if they need higher echelons of care? What is the time it takes us from anywhere on the route to get to those facilities? So that is another way we can mitigate loss of life if something does happen.
Hmm.
But everybody can look at what they're doing and where they're going and think about it from the flip side is, could I pattern myself? Could I make it, is it easy to determine where I'm going to be and what I'm doing? And at least start with there. But we definitely have that conversation and we walk through our client schedule, especially when we're going to go somewhere that's not normal. If it's been broadcasted, if there's a public speaking engagement that they can't get out of, that's something that has to happen for business purposes. We can absolutely look at their schedule and see where we can mitigate things before we even step on the ground and have a team around them to handle situations like this.
Okay. So let's talk about two things I want to talk about. First, I want to talk about social media. What is your recommendation for people who they might use social media all the time? Say this CEO used a lot of social media to connect with people or to talk about what's coming up with the company. Do you think that's a good idea, or how do you feel about social media?
Yeah, social media is a powerful tool. I think that it's definitely something we can't avoid. And I would definitely not recommend not using it because it's fantastic for business. I mean, what you've
Sure.
created here is fantastic with this podcast, and the networking piece is amazing. I would just say be considerate of what you're posting, when you're posting, and how you're posting. Some of the clients that we work with, not only are they CEOs, but their personal brand is tied to them as a CEO. And that is a huge part of their internal brand, their messaging, how they reach out to new prospects and clients. So it's very integral. So a few steps that you can do is look at what you're posting visually, what's in the background. Are there things does it show your home? Does it show your
Mm,
street that you live on? Are you doing live streams as you're going to get coffee every morning and you have street signs in the background? Think about these things a little bit more intentionally. And then also when you're posting, if you are like some of our influencer clients, their personal brand and their business is built off of their intimate personal lives that they share.
mhm,
And so that you really want to be considerate of when we're posting things. Maybe we post things offset. Maybe it's a day late. Maybe it's 2 days late. So if we're taking a trip and we're going to be in Europe for the next week, maybe we don't post those European pictures until we get back from the trip. So these are some considerations that I would say you need to take into account. From our side, from the protector side, there is some benefits of social media where we can see who's commenting, who's posting, what groups
mhm.
are agreeing with this, what groups are disagreeing with this. So I definitely would not say shy away from social media. I think it's where we are going, but consider what, when, and the content of what you're posting, and just try and be mindful of it.
Okay. Now, do you have a team that you work with when you have, say, a CEO who's going to a big board meeting, or it's an annual report meeting or whatever they're going to? Do you have a team in place that follows them? And is it a large team? Does it vary?
Mhm. Yeah, so similar to when you go to a cardiologist and you ask about, what's going on with your heart, they're going to assign to you a prescription. They're going to prescribe what is needed. And we do much the same. I have no need to give a CEO with low risk a full 5, 6 man team with a digital element that's looking and monitoring the media scene as well as people on the ground. It's really going to scale up or down depending on what the risk level is, what the threats that have been made against them, what's the threat profile of this individual. For example, the healthcare space and insurance is pretty hot right now, so we'll consider all of those things. But we specialize in low profile protection. So ideally, we want to blend into your environment. We want to enhance your environment. We don't want you to have the preconceived notion of black suit, black tie. It's going to impact my entire life and what happens. So ideally, it would depend on where the client is going, who they're engaging with. Are they going to be a public speaker in this engagement? However, it's very common that we'll have at least a 2 to 3 man team on the ground with a person at any given time. That may include a driver, that may include a close protection specialist who's going to be near or around the principal, and then somebody who is within a close proximity to that, who is picking up on the entirety of the environment, looking for threats, observing threats, and going back to the statistic in the US that most attacks happen in 25 feet or less, observing the rings of what may happen within that space to mitigate it before it becomes violent.
I got to figure out how to ask this question, but when you look at a government run organization, they usually have the necessary strategies and people and even finances, like the budget, to take care of politicians and such. Do you think that companies, non-government companies, like private companies, public companies, should it be their responsibility to have a department that has a budget and a team of people that run and operate security for their executives?
Great question.
That's a fantastic question. And it's definitely one that it does exist at a lot of Fortune 500 or very large companies. You'll see they have entire security departments that focus on both sides of the house, access control for all of their physical locations and security plans, emergency action plans. And then there will usually be a smaller subset or department that runs their executive protection and C-suite, CXO executive protection whole program. It's definitely something that can be for companies watching this that want a competitive edge in today's market. I would say that's something you could offer from a package or compensation plan that, hey, we do provide access to these resources. And like I said, it doesn't mean that you need a full-time detail driving you to and from everywhere, vetting your schedule all the time. However, at least the first assessment piece and the availability of it when needed, if you're going to a conference, if you have these public engagements where it makes sense to have a detail, I would say that is definitely something it should be thought about at least by boards of directors for these larger companies. And a lot of the principals and companies that we work with, they see the value and benefit of it. Not only is it something that can be a benefit for the CEO who is going to be stepping into this role. However, it's great for the board, for the company, for everybody, the employees working there. Because if you have to lose a CEO or a CEO gets injured even, this turns into a massive scramble of we need to replace the CEO. There's what's the knowledge that was lost of what was coming up? What were the plans in place? The same way that you would transition to a new CEO if there was a firing and hiring, this is abrupt. So it's kind of an insurance plan in itself of keeping this person safe. It's a benefits package to have, more CEOs that want to take on this position. But I'd absolutely say from the responsibility standpoint of the company, it's a great consideration, at least having a professional assessment done.
It's really interesting that you're talking about this because I feel like this is something, if we are working with a high level CEO, that this might be something that we can negotiate in their package for them. Because the only client I've ever really had that was something similar to this was I had a woman who she was former CIA and she was going to work for this particular company. And it was overseas and she had to fly to Africa a lot in the work that she was doing, part of her contract. And it scared me to death. And it didn't scare her because she was used to this. But in the contract, it said, we will pay all ransoms if you get kidnapped. And I was like, oh my God, are you sure you want to take this job? And she was used to hearing things like that. I was not. So for something like that, yes, this might be something that now that we're aware of it, it might be something that we can help negotiate in a contract. So I'm really happy that we're learning more about this and that this is something that people do have sometimes in their contract. We do work with some higher level people. So I love this conversation.
Love to ask you, similar to how we were just dissecting the footage and the information about the healthcare CEO, I want to pick your brain about the assassination made on President Donald Trump in July, because there were a ton of reels and memes like flying over the internet, and basically the average folk were picking fun at the people who were responding to this, saying, how were these people qualified? They didn't respond the way that someone should. Now, because these are average people making these claims, I honestly don't know what to believe. It seems like you'd be the perfect person to ask for. Did that behavior seem in alignment with professionals or not?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's one that I've talked about quite a bit with people asking this question in the aftermath of that. So first and foremost, there's breaking down that situation. There are some people who responded proficiently and did a good job, and others who did not within that same detail. It's a very complex operation. I know people working in the Secret Service. I have people who've worked in the Secret Service previously. And not only is it the Secret Service organization conducting events like this, they're working with adjacent units such as law enforcement. I believe the counter sniping team that was on the roof behind Trump, there was the organizations that are all working together. There's a lot of complexity there. Now, the actual close protection that took place on Trump could have been a little bit faster in terms of getting on top of him. I do think that the initial jump was reasonable in terms of them identifying something is going on and get him to the ground. There's different techniques that you can use to to move the principal off of the dangerous location where the violence took place. But first, you want to assess where the violence is coming from so you're not moving into more danger. So the initial jumping on top of him, I think, was a reasonable time frame. I think where they started to break down is how long it took to get the principal up, move him from the stage to the secure vehicle and get him out of there. After that, there's pictures that have come out of different protectors who were in that detail, one of which had a difficulty finding her holster as she was putting her firearm away. And those are individual actions that are disappointing to see, especially in a world where acting under stress and acting when the pressure is the highest is on top of everything that we do. That's one of the top check boxes in terms of getting into this space. So it also points out that image is a big part of it for these clients and for these teams as well. So a positive image has a positive impact, obviously, but you can have the same impact by not finding your holster, by not looking the part, by not standing correctly outside of the vehicle or putting Trump inside of the vehicle. So you're under a microscope with that much media attention. However, I feel for everybody who was on the ground during that, because any violent encounter is not one that you want to be a part of. But at the end of the day, the job was done safely. Trump did survive by, very small margin. However, they did get him out. They did get him in the vehicle. But from a full protection review, there is a lot of individual actions that could have been done a lot better.
Yeah, I saw the replay, obviously, on social media many, many times. And I felt that, and I hate to say this because they saved his life and they're professionals, but at one point I felt like I was watching the Keystone Cops, and it was a comedy because of their, just couldn't find the holster and, moving around a certain way. It was craziness. And, I would think that you're protecting a former president, that there would be a lot more professionalism in how it's done and not letting him stand up and scream, fight, 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 because he's putting himself more at risk. So I felt like there were a lot of holes there that should have been taken care of in a different way. I'm sure you would agree with that.
Absolutely. And this goes back to where I talked about that planning is paramount for the success of the operation. And that's where the first breakdown took place. Having access control that allowed somebody to get that close to be able to take a shot from a roof like that. For them having not identified him, there's videos that have come out where he walked through security with a rangefinder and then was walking around and people were videoing him. That
and
alone
he was on the roof. People saw him and they were saying, call the police, and nothing happened.
Yeah.
I feel like when you are an observer to an objective observer to the outside of a scene, it's so different than when you're in the scene. It's almost like when you watch a movie and the big tidal wave is coming and people are standing on the beach, looking at the tidal wave. And you as the watcher, you're like, run. I was at the gym the other day and I was on the treadmill and all the fire alarms were going off. The lights were buzzing. I was the only one who moved. Everybody else stayed still. And I'm like, what is happening? Don't you guys watch movies? And part of the Trump assassination was you could see the people in the stands behind him all pointing. You could tell that other people were highly aware that something was wrong, and yet nobody was acting. Nobody was reacting to that. It's almost like the civilians were the ones who caught it. But again, you're only seeing that one visual shot. There could have been other things happening in the background. It's deceiving.
What do you think you might have done differently in that situation if you had a team on the ground?
Yeah, so if we would have had a team on the ground, first and foremost, we would have done, and not to say that they didn't, but there was obviously a breakdown, but extensive pre-work in terms of where the most likely locations, where shots could be taken from. Obviously, with the statistics that we have on different assassination attempts from the past, what does that look like for this specific venue? Our close protection team, what are the steps that we're going to take in a violent encounter? Have we rehearsed those? We're going to do a physical and digital advance of the location. So we're going to have people go walk the grounds, walk where the routes to and from the podium are going to be. We're going to walk to those positions where potential shots could be taken from. And then we're going to have communications plans set in place, backup communications plans set in place. For the scope and scale of the logistics for an event like this, we probably would try and have some type of aerial asset in the air, a drone or something that's also looking and observing over this place. That's not necessarily a expensive thing to have in today's age. So we would have used all resources that we could have. But more importantly, the fundamentals of where's the speech happening, what are the routes we're going to take out of here? Where is the most likely course of action from an adversary that would take place? And then we're going to rehearse those. So that way, in this event, not only are we going to have better communication, so I've heard on different threads that maybe the communication wasn't proper between the team that was supposed to be in that building and the counter sniper team. They should have a backup plan for that. You should have a backup plan for that. There was another video of one of the police vehicles not being able to get through a gate because they didn't have a key. So making sure that they had the right.
Didn't see that one.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things there that we would have wanted to work through even before we stepped foot on the ground. But then in the actual incident, as soon as we detect that a shot has been taken, get the principal off the stage, get him to a safe location as soon as possible, get him away from that location, start triaging or conducting medical care as best as possible on the way to a higher level trauma center to get him taken care of. But speed is essence. There's a golden 10-minute window that we like to talk about in executive protection of the incident occurring to getting them to a higher echelon of care. We want to keep that to about 10 minutes if possible. And that would have been the biggest thing is speed is everything. And like you said, the crowd didn't move. So there wasn't this big wave of chaos moving, which made it harder to get off of that stage. So that's what we would have done, hopefully differently. It's hard to say without being in that situation, but we would absolutely approach it from that standpoint is let's make sure our pre-work is done correctly and make sure that when and if an event happens that we're on top of it speed-wise.
Now, what do you feel that your company does differently than, say, another organization that does what you do?
I would say the biggest thing that we really try and do is have more of a concierge approach. So we want security to be an adder in your life or an addition to your life, not a detractor from your life as a C-suite executive. You have too many things trying to grab your attention day in and day out. We want you to look and do what you are best at to enhance your career. There's a scale that we have developed at the EP Source over years of talking with clients and over the course of the entirety of my career, but it's basically a scale that is between safety and freedom. So if you think about a scale with safety on one side and freedom on the other side, security is going to fall somewhere in the middle. And so we want to work with the client to determine where does that need to fit for your day-to-day life. We don't need a full bubble wrapped safety plan where full access control, you never leave the house, you never go anywhere. That's not going to work for business. That doesn't keep you moving forward. On the other side, if you are totally free, that doesn't help you either. You have no security controls or measures in place to make sure that you are safe. So we want to find that happy medium, but we want to put the protectors and protection team in place that is going to fit within your lifestyle, that are going to be able to pick up on the subtle cues that when maybe you come in from the car after a long day and you don't want to talk to somebody, who's going to pick up on those cues and the soft skills to know that this is the time to be quiet, let them decompress. When they're coming on and off of a corporate aircraft going to and from meetings, are they wanting to talk about the security plan right away before we hit the ground, or maybe they need to decompress, they have meetings to take? Just being mindful of those soft skills, as we like to call them, in terms of how you interface and interact, your social or your emotional intelligence, being mindful of the environment around you. That's our competitive edge, is we like to have people that are fit the role for the right principal, for the right location. And on top of that, protectors who are looking for work. They're always trying to be that concierge. A lot of our protectors have small tips and tricks they've developed over the years, such as carrying an extra shirt in the same size and brand for the principal. So if they spill coffee on their shirt in a meeting, the rest of their day of meetings are not ruined. If they travel with kids, having snacks, wipies, and things to keep the kid occupied and happy while the protector is in a meeting. Even picking up coffee for a principal before you reach them for their day's work saves you as the protector the opportunity for the principal needing to make a coffee stop, which is an unplanned stop, an unplanned location, non-advanced location. So these little concierge things benefit the team and the principal, but ultimately they just enhance the principal's life. That's our goal. Enhance their C-suite team life, their executive assistants, their personal family office as well. Make sure that we are doing our best job to keep people safe first and foremost, but enhance their life overall.
I love that. I love that, especially as someone who, if I'm riding in the car, say with an Uber driver, I'm one of those people who I don't want to talk. So if for people to pick up on that, I think it's pretty awesome. Do you find that this is something that is really more necessary nowadays than it was maybe in the past? Is this something that's a growing industry?
Absolutely. I mean, going back to the social media conversation, you have this unique anomaly happening where you don't necessarily have to be a public figure in the traditional sense to have the same visibility and knowledge being put out as one. And so we're seeing this also in the social media space. A lot of these influencers are building brands and companies around that. So it's a unique thing where it's built in reverse. It used to be the billionaire who built this company is now a media figure. It's happening in reverse nowadays as
Mm.
well. And so it's absolutely a growing market, a growing concern. And so we have to adapt. We have to make sure we're doing the things to be ready for the concerns that arise. But it's definitely, it's been around, but it's a growing market. And I think it's shifting away from the traditional black suit, black tie. I have to have a team of 4 dudes around me, moving me around to, hey, how about we approach this mindfully and we figure out how we can best balance what you need to do in your daily life to be effective and maintaining a level of safety.
Mm.
The time frame of you being on this podcast, aside from the healthcare CEO assassination, is also funny because I just went private on my Instagram because I have so much of my professional life out in the wilds that now I'm just thinking about. I have a almost 9-year-old son, and it's like now I'm thinking about his safety and his level of exposure. Melissa and I had mentioned on our previous podcast that we're now live in 17 different countries. So that's just a little scary. So recently I did go private on social media, and it's interesting how security has evolved because now I'm thinking back to JFK's assassination, and back then there was no social media, and now there is social media. So that's a whole new element. And now we're moving into another type of added risk, which is AI. So my question to you is, how is the introduction and utilization of AI playing a new role in security, and you guys needing to figure out, how to get around those challenges?
That's a great question because AI is absolutely here to stay. I think specifically generative AI has been this massive change in perception in terms of what AI can do and the potentials for outcomes. I would say the unique thing for executive protection is you're always going to need that human element with a principal. The 25 feet or less attacks that do occur, assassination attempts, you need to have somebody on the ground. So those hard skills and principles, and hard skills meaning physical combatives, the ability to respond to situations, being able to move a principal off of a violent location. These are things that are not going anywhere. The advent of AI just means that we need to be more mindful on the media front, on the digital front of how we're assessing these clients, understanding what information is out there and how easy it can be accessed by people who previously did not have that capacity unless they were able to hack into systems or pull personal data. So it's a lot more, it's a lot easier to get that data nowadays.
Mhm.
So really, with the advent of AI, we aren't going to change much on the physical side because those principles, we want to always be evolving to a standard that is maintainable. But when you're within that 25-foot window, you just need to be competent in the hard skills. But on the soft skills side, on the virtual side of things, it definitely presents a new concern. It's something that we are taking into consideration. We're looking at ways to leverage it for benefit, not just a detractor. It allows us to pull
Yeah.
from more resources and gather more information for some of these threat assessments, for these, when we're assessing environments before we walk into them. How can we implement AI to benefit us? Because obviously there's the negative aspect of what it can provide.
Now, without using any names, or are there any stories, or are there things that come to mind that was like the most exciting thing or the scariest situation that you've ever been in?
So yeah, definitely plenty of NDAs in place with names and locations. So I can't share some of the crazier ones. However, 2 stories that come to mind. One, I was working as a solo practitioner early on in my career with a principal who was an artist type. They were having a very intimate closed event with a lot of their following. It was about 60 or 70 people in a small location in a major US city. And there was somebody who approached with a gift for the principal. And so this always becomes an interesting situation of how you handle this. And I wasn't told about the gift prior from the principal. And so she said, "Hey, I have this gift for him." I said, "Well, hey, set this right here on this table. We'll make sure this gets to him. Want to make sure this gets taken care of." Again, the soft skills to make sure that I don't know if this is supposed to be received or not yet. I want to make sure that we don't cause any problems here. And then she turns to me and goes, "They're human remains." And that initially was a little bit surprising and shocking, but keeping composure, I was like, all right, I appreciate it. I'll make sure this gets to the principal. I was able to communicate this to the principal, and it does turn out these were ashes of a mentor of his, of a longtime mentor.
Oh my
And
That's
goodness.
so
still weird.
It's definitely, it was the first time I'd ever encountered this,
But
for
I mean,
sure.
to present it, to say it's human remains instead of
Right.
explaining,
Right.
that's
This is
crazy.
Ash's. Yeah, absolutely. It shows the wide scope of what can happen in the role and how to
Yeah,
handle that effectively in terms of not causing a scene when this first takes place, understanding what's the risk, who's the person bringing this, how big is the package, what's the,
right,
there's a lot of things that we take into consideration. But on the flip side, how bad would it have looked if I immediately took action and made this big deal out of it, and it turned
right.
out to be his mentor's ashes that were very sentimental, and it would have been a very bad look on the security detail.
Yeah.
So that's one story. And then a second story actually happened traveling between locations. Personally, I had to move flights to meet up with a client earlier. I was flying out of Denver to go to the Pacific Northwest. And I entered the airport, and there was somebody who was getting checked out by paramedics at my gate. They clearly looked like they had been having some mental health type of crisis. So I, made one mental note there in terms of what was happening. As the plane is boarding, I like to wait to get on the plane a little bit later if I can. I noticed they did let this individual on the plane. So I board the plane like normal. And I was sitting in, as my last minute flight change that I had to get there earlier. I was in a middle seat towards the back of the plane, trying to get some sleep between two people on this early flight. And I woke up out of my sleep to heavy footsteps running down the center aisle and a flight attendant yelling, "Somebody stop him." And so, based on the data points that I'd previously collected of this individual being checked out in the terminal, them letting him on the plane without even, without me needing to think about it, I took off my headphones, moved my phone, I jumped over the person next to me and went sprinting off in a matter of 2 seconds toward the person running down the aisle. He had since dumped orange juice on his head and was stripping down to nothing while he's running towards the back of the plane. Luckily, this was not a full flight. There was some empty rows in the back, so I was able to corral him into one of the empty rows. And there was one of the other individuals in the plane. She was actually a cop of 20 years out of the Portland area who happened to be on this flight with me. So the flight attendants happen to also have flexi cuff. It's like handcuffs that are
I thought I
flexible
was
in
going to
nature.
ask you
So
if you had zip
yeah,
ties with you.
yeah. So we took the flexi cuffs, the zip tie cuffs, and we were able to restrain the individual, put them in the seat, and then I basically stood in the aisle the rest of the flight. We almost had to do an emergency landing to get this individual. They didn't know the what else he could have done. Obviously, it was better that he wasn't running towards the front of the aircraft, but there's still exits towards the back. So that's a crazy story that I think demonstrates just how some of this knowledge applies in a real world situation. It was definitely an interesting story in between going from one working location to another working location, and just what can happen there.
So was the person on drugs? I mean, the average person doesn't dump orange juice all over their bodies, right?
Yeah. So in conversation, after I tried to calm him down, one of the things that we work on hard is verbal de-escalation and trying to talk somebody down, get their heart rate back down, and really understand what's going on. It turns out that he had not taken some medication. So
Oh,
yeah, he unfortunately
that's
had
worse. Oh,
yeah, it was a mental health crisis. He didn't take his medication and was struggling. So I was able to have a conversation with him through, he was a little bit back and forth between wanting to dance, being on fire and being hot, and then coming back to his normal self. And so we were able to calm him down as well, and calm the rest of the passengers down, and make sure that after we landed, authorities could properly get him off of the plane. And end of the day, everybody's safe. So that's what really mattered.
wow.
Wow.
Awesome. So Melissa and I are totally into conspiracies. So I have to ask you, speaking of stories here, do you look back any time in history? Do you look back at any scenario that involved security and you raise an eyebrow because you're like, something fishy is going on with how this played out?
That is a great question. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is security related, but I would say a lot of the old mob stories or mobster stories, especially in the Northeast, in terms of how a lot of those organizations were run. Security had a lot of play in trafficking of product and money and things back and forth. So I would say that if there's a conspiracy to look into in terms of where security was used for nefarious activity, that's probably one of them. I'm sure that it's been used for nefarious activities elsewhere.
I'm sure.
It's yeah, there's definitely times where it's been used for bad, because it's a tool that you can use for good or bad. But yeah, I would say there's probably plenty of conspiracy theories that involve a security team doing things a little bit not by the book.
He's like, I don't really want to answer this question because my
Yeah.
reputation is on the line. We have to ask the questions anyway.
Yeah.
That's really awesome. So, real life scenarios that occur, you see things happen on movies, and that's really, hopefully, where most people experience things is just in movies. So, when a gunshot goes off in a movie, the first thing people do, the average civilian who doesn't have like a detailed security team, they duck. But there was something that you said earlier when we were talking about President Trump's assassination, how you said it's important to identify where the threat is coming from so that way you don't move into the line of fire. So for the average civilian, you hear a gunshot go off. Of course, no one really has any clue what's happening, but you see everyone duck. So that's obviously our human instincts, is to duck. Walk us through what we could do immediately after we duck. What action should we take next?
So again, I'll take you to the moments before or the hour before to answer that question to start. There's an awesome book by Gavin de Becker called The Gift of Fear. And essentially this book talks about every day as we go about our lives, we're collecting lots of data from our environment that allows us to process data when violence occurs. And when we actually feel fear, we take reaction to that. So it helps kind of distinguish what is fear, what is anxiety, and what should we actually be doing. Now, for example, if you hear a loud bang, not necessarily a gunshot, a loud bang, and your natural reaction is to duck, why did that cause you to duck, but another loud noise might not cause you to duck? Well, on your walk in to work that morning, maybe they were cleaning the dumpsters and there was loud repetition and banging that sounds like gunfire. So without you even thinking, your body's already processed what is considered the anomaly in this situation, that gunshot, versus, oh, there's construction and there's a jackhammer right next door, and that sounds very similar to gunfire. So observing your environment and just taking a little bit more of a cognitive approach of what is going on in your environment, your body's already taking in this data, just listen to that a little bit, will help you determine what may be a threat that is presented in my environment. Now, ducking is that natural reaction. If you are reacting, that shows that you have cognition to continue to move. So everything that we train with stress inoculation, specifically amongst all of our protectors, is to be able to have the mental acuity when an event like this takes place to observe your environment. Hopefully you've collected details to say where were areas that could have likely presented threats. Now we're looking into those as our first places to look at where the threat could have been presented. And then what places can we exit? What is the next course of action that we're going to take? And thinking about these things beforehand allows you to, in the moment, when your narrowed scope of cognition is presented, you can go where is more safe. You can go to that location. You can get out of that violent encounter. The initial ducking, I have no problem with that. I think that's a great response. If somebody was aiming at you, you're at least out of the view of where they're aiming towards. But that initial next step is extremely important. Most violent encounters in all the statistics and data that we talk about happen in 5 seconds or less. Those violent encounters that are assassinations specifically, they're very, very quick. So how fast you can respond is super important. So look at your environment beforehand, educate yourself. Very important to start off and help make the after action of that violent event taking place be more successful. Hopefully that answers your question on that.
It's funny that you say, a lot of what you're saying about being prepared is I'm somebody who has anxiety about social situations sometimes. And I am very aware of where the exit signs are. God forbid there's a fire, or I haven't been to the movie theater since 2020. So when I would go to the movie theater, I always preferred to sit in the back because, and I know this sounds crazy, so I'm going to say it anyway. I would be afraid that somebody behind me, if they had a gun or if they'd be behind me and I couldn't see them. So I would much prefer sitting in the back of the theater looking down so I know what's happening. I know how I can get out. And that may be just me being paranoid, but I always feel like I've always been like that, concerned with making sure my family or who I'm with or myself that we're safe. So do you find people are paranoid like that and do that all the time? Is that a normal human reaction?
This turns into a therapy session.
Yeah. Funny enough, my wife is a psychologist, so this is definitely her area of expertise in terms
childhood
of
trauma. I don't know.
Yeah. No. Yeah. It's definitely, I'm glad you're considering and thinking of these things, right? I like to talk about probability versus possibility. And obviously we're going to rely more on the data and the probability and likelihood of a situation more than just the possibility. taking advantageous steps to sit near an exit or be, having better visibility of the room that you're in are fantastic first steps from a protection mindset of looking at your environment. However, we don't want to overstimulate your system's ability to understand and recognize fear. So living in constant anxiety about a situation may, keep your system from realizing, is this actually a threat that's occurring, or is this just my anxiety about the situation? So walking in a parking lot late at night to your vehicle from that movie theater where it's dark out and you're walking to your vehicle, why are you getting this weird feeling? Is it anxiety about just knowing these situations have a higher probability, or is it just the possibility that it may happen? Now, maybe when you walked out, you picked up on somebody who was standing on a street corner looking nefarious. You noticed that there's a couple cars, or the situation, the parking lot doesn't look correct from when you came into the movie theater. These details can allow you to basically trigger your fear response and understand this is a credible threat versus this is something that is just an anxiety buildup. Your body is naturally taking in these pointers, and it's a very smart system. We've evolved over thousands of years to identify threats and be able to make accurate predictions off of this. So I would say you're not wrong by taking a stance to sit where you want to that makes you feel more comfortable, because if you're more comfortable, you're going to have a lower heart rate. You're going to be able to respond. These things are great. But yeah, consider the probability versus possibility of the situation to determine
I just
how
think
high
I
that
watch
risk
too
is.
much true crime.
I don't know if you know this, and Isaac, your wife can probably speak to this way better than I can, but Dante hates, my significant other hates that I love true crime documentaries, like you name it, like Menendez Brothers. I am on it. I'm all over it. But I did some research, Melissa, and apparently women do have an affinity towards things like that, because not because we love drama, but because it actually helps us understand how to survive better, because we are the more vulnerable sex, which I think is
agree
so
with that.
interesting,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
It's a great point, and women are actually, because of that and because of how history has evolved, you're actually picking up on more data points, and your sense of fear, your fear meter is typically actually better than males a lot of times, just because we have this fake preconceived notion that I can handle any situation and I'm going to be fine. And that's a dangerous thought to have.
Yeah.
Even a UFC fighter walks around with security details, right? And so it's not to say that one's capability is not great. It's that it is super important to be paying attention to those. And true crime is also fascinating. I think it's a growing genre.
But
in
it's
terms of what's going
watching
on.
mystery or, murder mysteries, and, you're looking at how you would respond in that situation. And I often look at these and I go, who responds like, what are you doing? I would not respond that way in that situation. And so I think, to your point, it's good for us watching it because it does make us more aware in how we would respond in a specific situation. Now, walking my dog when he was here, in the neighborhood, and I'm on alert worrying that, somebody's going to pick up, this 55-year-old woman and sex traffic her somewhere. I need to take it down a notch a little bit on that.
They'll give you back, Melissa.
They will give me back for sure.
Are you familiar with neural pathways and how that work in terms of thinking through situations? Have you you've heard of that topic before?
No, I have. Yeah.
Yeah, so we, in some of our active shooter courses that we teach at corporate events and things like that, I like to talk about neural pathways and how thinking ahead through situations that could or may occur gives you the ability to think through something before it happens. Now, there is a scientific backing to this. The only difference between, let's say you're sitting in a room and you see an exit, walking to that exit versus thinking about walking to that exit. The only difference that your body recognizes between thinking and doing is the muscle memory. The neural pathway that you're building by thinking through, what do I need to do when I stand up? Is there anything in my way? How do I clear that chair out of my way? Walking around the desk, walking to the door, walking past that table. When you think about all of the nuance, it builds this neural pathway in your brain. So when your brain is reduced in terms of its capacity, when your heart rate escalates and there's a violent situation, it gives you a higher likelihood of success. So thinking through situations is definitely something that can be a tool to help you out.
It's incredibly interesting science, and I won't get too deep in here because I know we're like coming up on time, but this is why athletes or, public speakers, they visualize what they're going to do before they get in the game or get on stage, because just like Isaac was saying, your brain can't determine the difference between the thought of it happening and it actually happening. The only difference really comes down to that muscular movement, which is so incredibly fascinating. I mean, what more data do you really need to show how amazing driving our vehicle is, and we can truly like manifest what we're going to do in the future just by visualizing it.
Yeah, they've actually
Absolutely.
shown that if they, hook up your muscles and everything, if you're visualizing it, a lot of times those muscles will fire as you're visualizing it. So it is good
The
to,
human
I'm going to
body's
say it is
incredible.
good to think where you're going and being aware of your surroundings. I might take
Absolutely.
it down a little bit, but I think it's good.
A teensy, and I think in the animal kingdom, most species, the female takes care of the babies until they're, out of the nest or out of the den or whatever the case may be. The males are hunting for food and bringing it back. Sometimes males don't even stick around for the evolution of the offspring. So it makes sense too why, because you were saying, oh, if you go to the movies, especially with your kids, you're thinking about the safety of them. Women are so hyper focused on all these things, which is incredibly interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. It's nature's way of keeping you safe, is understanding your situation, your vulnerabilities, and determining how to keep yourself and your offspring safe.
Yeah. I have one last question to finish this up if Melissa doesn't have one. If there's someone listening to this and they're thinking, am I at the point in my career where I should consider security, or maybe I'm not? Like, tell our listeners what are some good identifiers that they really should be taking that next step.
And also how they can get in touch with you.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first and foremost, educate yourselves on just a little bit of this information. The same way that I don't expect you to be a cardiologist to know that something's wrong with your heart, think about what happens in your day-to-day life and know to just seek professional help. I would say check out the executive protection, the EP source on YouTube and Instagram. We're constantly putting out free information for the principal, for the CEOs in this position to consider, hey, did these things happen to me? Should I be worried about this? But seek professional help. We're not the type of organization that wants to give you a full-time detail. We have clients all over, and we have specific needs for professionals to be out protecting them. So I don't want to take away capability from those who actually need it. However, if there's a real threat and a real risk that is involved in your life, a professional is going to be able to tell you whether you should be at risk or not. And it's going to give you back that cognition in your day to go about your day. So first and foremost, The Gift of Fear is a great resource. That's a great book to read to just understand your daily environment. To reach out to the EP source, check out everything that we have to offer to see if this is something that should concern you. But if you have any questions at all, this is your life. The same way that you don't want your heart to fail because you didn't go to the correct, medical professional. Ask the questions. We're happy to have a conversation, and then you can determine the level of threat and what is needed to keep yourself safe. So you can check us out at the EP source. That's probably the best way to get in touch with us, theepsource@gmail.com for any inquiries. Otherwise, yeah, I'm glad to have been able to have this time and have this conversation. I really appreciate the questions, fantastic questions. And I hope if you're out there listening, this at least gave you a little bit of insight and information to consider your safety.
Awesome. Isaac, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been helpful for us. It's going to be helpful for our clients and helpful for any listeners out there. So again, we appreciate you taking the time, and thank you so much. And thank you for listening out there. And we'll see you next time on The Job Chicks.